So when we meet God, or when God finds us and meets us, how do we react? There's a lot of possible responses, but they tend to land, at least in Scripture, and I think at least in my own life, in two categories. Sometimes we are tempted after meeting something so precious and powerful and wonderful to grab a hold and not let go and try to hang on for dear life and maybe to claim it for ourselves a little bit. This is something that we can see not really in the readings we have, but in the stuff that's around them. So Isaiah is being called to be a prophet, to speak to God's people who have that temptation that we have when we feel like we have found and know God. They have God's presence in the temple, and they know it, and they can count on it. It has been promised to them. And God's people are able to come and to go and able to live however they would like. And it's so tempting to say, well, but we've got God over there in our temple, so of course we are right. Whatever we're doing is right because our nation was called and gathered, and that is absolutely true. And so, well, we're God's people, and whatever we're doing must be okay. And God calls Isaiah to say something rather different, to say, here's the things that I've told you. Remember that book of my love and my law that I gave you that you treasure so much? There's some stuff in there that I want you to attend to. But it's so easy as God's people, as people of faith, as people familiar with Scripture and with prayer to say, well, I've got God kind of where I want him. I've got God, she's in my pocket where I can pull her out when I need her, right? To co-sign on all of my selfishness, to vote the way I would, to back me up in all of my arguments, and to find me a good parking space, right? It's tempting to think of God as sort of this wonderful helper that we can just carry around with us and really not expect a lot of interference from. In Luke, right before this story, both about a chapter before, as we heard last week, when Jesus came to his hometown, they all said, oh, yes, he's ours. He's ours. Aren't we so proud? We can take credit for that. And of course, Jesus, you're going to do the stuff here now, right? This is your home territory. We're ready. Let us tell you how it's going to go. It did not. And then later on here, just a few verses before chapter 5 starts, Jesus has been out doing healing and teaching and casting out demons, and at daybreak he went into a deserted place, and the crowds were looking for him, and when they reached him, they wanted to prevent him from leaving. Jesus, you're ours. Stay put. Do what we need you to do. Stop wandering around. Jesus, this is your community. These are your people. We are the ones you need to take care of. It is so tempting to grab a hold of God and claim for ourselves that power, that love. It's mine, right? We all have the ways that we know that we do that, where we sort of feel like we've got God in our pocket and we can decide when and how God comes out or does not. So that's one temptation that kind of is around our stories today. But most of the stories that we hear today, all of them in fact, are the opposite temptation. So we either want to grab and hold on and keep for ourselves and make nice and small and contained, or recognizing how big and other God is, out of here, right? Peter says, there is no way that you and I can occupy the same boat. We are so utterly different. Isaiah says, woe is me. Having seen God, I might just die. There is such a difference between me and that, between all the people I know and that, right? Even Paul, he's making his list of all the people that God has come to and again who saw Jesus and met the risen Christ, and it's everybody and everybody and everybody, and then to one as untimely born, unfit to be called an apostle, God came to me. I did not count for anything relative to the love and mercy of God. He knew it. Only by the grace of God am I what I am. And so you got to wonder about poor Peter, because he's met Jesus already. He has already met Jesus in the bit that we didn't get to hear. Jesus preached in the synagogue and then came home with Peter and healed his mother-in-law. So Peter knows Jesus. And it's interesting, he calls Jesus master. Teacher, sort of a term of respect. Sir, something that you would call someone that was important. But it only changes to Lord. Lord, that idea of someone who has a claim on you. It only changes to Lord when Jesus shows up at work. Isn't that interesting? Jesus shows up where Peter is in his element. Peter wasn't planning on healing his mother-in-law. He didn't think he could do that. But Peter knows about fish. And Peter knows that if you've been out all night and you've done your best and there's nothing in your nets, then you just wash them and you try again tomorrow. There's always another tomorrow. The fish will come, but you've put in your effort, and there's no point, particularly in the day. Fishing isn't good in the day when you've got the kind of nets that fish can see. So you take them out and you wash them. And Jesus shows up, and Jesus says, well, no, we're going out into the deep water. And only after going out into the deep water with Jesus, after seeing that there is something else entirely going on here. This is not just someone who occasionally heals. This is not a great teacher who can read the scriptures and explain them. This is someone you call Lord. Someone who has a claim on your life. Then Peter says, get away from me. I cannot be in the same boat as you. I am a sinful man. And I don't think that Peter is thinking necessarily about the list of how he was rude to his brother and he sometimes gets grumpy, any of that. I don't think he had necessarily even some great, big, terrible past that he was reflecting on. He just knew that if that is what God is like, I'm nothing like that. I can't even imagine how we would occupy the same space. Isaiah says, woe is me, I might die. And so the temptation is to run away as far as possible, as fast as possible, partly because we're terrified, and partly because we have a sneaking suspicion that this Lord who has a claim on us might ask something of us, right? If I can put enough distance between me and Jesus, I can't hear him, sorry. What was that you said? But both of these things are a little bit true, right? There is something true about both of these reactions. There is something true about the idea that God could possibly be close enough to us to walk around with us, right? That is the gift of the presence of God in the temple, is that God is in the midst of God's people. And that is the unbelievable gift of Jesus, that Jesus is that holiness in the flesh, walking around, pulling up nets and sweating and stinking next to Peter. That's unbelievable. And at the same time, God is so utterly different that Peter, who knows how fishing works and how all of this works, can be utterly floored when God is actually in his presence and up literally in his business. Here's the thing. It's really not about how we respond to God. It's really not, thank goodness. And that's what all of these stories are telling us. It's not about how we respond to God, because we're not going to get it right. There's no way to get it right. There is no right answer to the presence of God where you would just have the right words. Even the angels are just repeating the same thing. It's about God, right? It's about God and what God does. It's about God's claim on us. It's not about Peter being the best and most suited to follow Jesus and be the chief disciple. Because if we have ever heard the story of Peter after Jesus calls him, after Jesus claims him, after Jesus says, this one's mine, it doesn't go so well. He doesn't actually have the room to run while he's in the boat with Jesus, but when Jesus is on the cross, Peter is out of there. And so are all these other people, right? And when they have put everything down, they've left their nets to go follow Jesus, and then things seem to have gone all haywire. We don't know what's going on. What do? They go right back to their nets, and Jesus has to come and find them again after Easter and say, hey guys, I've got a job for you. Remember what I told you to do? Well, now we're sending you out. The whole story before then is the disciples following around, watching and learning. They're not doing much of anything. They're following, and they're watching, and they're learning. And that's the gift. That we are claimed not because of who we are or how wonderful we are. We are not claimed in order that we might feel terrible about ourselves. Nowhere in there does the angel or Jesus say, yeah, you should really sit with that for a while. No, do not be afraid. God is sending you out because God is the one who has a claim on you. That's what equips us. When we come to baptism, we come often as little squirrely babies, sometimes as adults with a whole history, and either way, God says, you who probably are not going to do wonderful and impressive things to everyone around you in the next 3 seconds, you're mine. I have called you. I have claimed you. And that's what equips us to follow Jesus. Thanks be to God.